Welcome back viewers, ladies, gentlemen, non-binaries and anyone with ears or other sound detection organs. Hope you enjoy. We are continuing with Going Native, written by Uncle Sealing. Going Native, Chapter 20. Ellora was excited as she made her way into the cabin. Clutched in one hand was a small mammal, the first one caught with a snare she had made herself. While it wasn't a lot of meat, it was her first real accomplishment in providing for her winter family. The boys would be proud of her. The creature fell to the floor as Ellora noticed the scene playing out in front of her. Stace was, of course, in bed. His face was red like he had just run a marathon. He was covering his face with his hands, and he was shaking, trying to hold in laughter. Ian was standing in front of him, his own face dark blue with embarrassment as he held the dildo in Stace's face. Ian, what the name of the goddess are you doing? The male froze, then slowly turned towards her. I thought you would be gone longer. That doesn't really answer the question. Ellora stooped to pick up her catch, then held it up. Stace, what is this? The human held in his laughter just enough to reply in shrill, it's a snowshoe hare. Good job, then went back to laughing until he started a coughing fit. That seemed to diffuse the situation as Ellora joined Ian at Stace's bedside, making sure their human was all right. Now what exactly were you trying to do, aside from killing Stace with impromptu comedy? Ian, still holding the dildo in one hand, looked down at the floor, abashed. I was trying to figure out if he, liked us. By waving a dick in his face. Ellora wasn't sure how she felt. On one hand she felt protective of her patient, and didn't want to cause him additional stress with weird questions. On the other, she really wanted to know how Stace felt about her. He hadn't rebuffed her flirting, but he also hadn't really participated. Was she coming on too strong? Not strong enough? Please slow. Don't talk. Around me. Stace was scrolling through his pad, trying to string a sentence together. It is. Shit, what's the word for rude, bad talk? It is rude, Stace. I am sorry. Stace nodded to Ellora, then made another note on his pad. Looking over to Ian, she could see that the sad look in his eyes that revealed his own unspoken apology. We're sorry. Stace scrolled through his pad, brow furrowed in thought as he strung together what he wanted to say. We will talk about attractive male-female when I have good words. I could translate, Ellora offered. As much as she appreciated Stace's remarkable efforts to learn and only speak the shill language, getting everything out in the open had to happen at some point. For better or for worse, she would learn how Stace felt about her. About them? The human's head shake looked final. Some words are, not for all. Private. Stace meant private. What did he need to say to Ian that Ellora wasn't allowed to hear? And we have work to do. Stace gestured to the Ellora's catch. No. Ellora and Stace turned to look at Ian. The little lilac male's skin was pale and he was trembling, but his voice was firm. I don't want any secrets between us. If you have something to tell me, tell it now. Stace tried to rub the back of his neck with his right hand, but the arm started twitching and he felt a shooting pain. He dropped his arm sheepishly and looked at the pair of aliens whose lives he saved, and in return had saved his. How could he explain what was going on in his head, especially when he wasn't too sure of it himself? Still, he had to do something. Ian looked like he was about to cry and Ellora didn't look much better. Ellora, you will have to translate. I suppose it's story time. She responded by climbing over him to cuddle up against Stace between the human and the wall. While he was distracted, Ian slipped in on the other side. It seemed like the standard procedure for getting information from Stace was going to be to cuddle it out of him. There were worse forms of coercion. Stace noticed the book sitting in Iing's lap. The little brat must have grabbed it while Stace was being clambered over. Of course, if he knew what it was, then the pair had probably flipped through it at some point. They likely knew part of the story. Try as he might, Stace couldn't really work up any anger over the intrusion. He never told them not to look, and, like Iing had said, no more secrets. Stace stretched across with his left hand and held it out, gesturing for the photo album. Iing obligingly handed it over, asking a question in Shil. The book naturally fell open to a familiar scene, an exchange of vows. Daniel. His name was Daniel. Stace paused, his finger gently stroking the photo. I was never good at relationships. Being around other people is uncomfortable. He was the first person I ever met whose company felt better than solitude. Stace took a moment to swallow, mouth suddenly dry. We met in college, in a biology course. At first, we were just friends. As close as you could ever be. I knew he was gay, but I had never really considered being with another man. My previous relationships were with women, but, like I said, solitude felt better. Nothing lasted. Waiting for Ella to catch up with the translation, Stace had a moment to collect his thoughts. As we got closer, spent more time together, Daniel tried to make his intentions known. But, as I said, I've never been good at relationships. That Stace gestured at the sky blue dildo standing proud on the table, was Daniel's way of letting me know that he had been flirting with me for 6 months. Literally hit me over the head with it to get my attention. Ella's laughter preceded her translation and Iing's laughter followed. Stace couldn't help but join in. After another coughing fit, the trio sat in comfortable silence. Stace really didn't want to continue the story. It was getting painful, and he didn't know how to go from the fun-loving Daniel to what happened after. How did he pass? Ella's voice was tender, full of compassion, and the glistening of tears in her eyes matched Stace's own. Cancer. It was slow. Painful. Once he was gone, I had to deal with some unpleasant circumstances I would much rather not get into right now. His family was not pleased with our marriage and took his death out on me. Stace took a moment for a quick sniff and a clearing of his throat. Talking about this hurt, but there was a certain cathartic release along with it. After Daniel was gone, being alone hurt, but being around people was worse. Coming out here saved me. Until we came along. Every instinct in Ella's body was telling her to stop Stace from answering her question. It was clear he was in pain and what she wanted, what she needed to do, was wrap the frail, pale man in her arms, to protect and comfort him. He was hurting. But she had to know. Stace's smile was small and sad, but held no malice. Until you came along. Yes. Ella could feel her heart starting to break, only stopping when the smile became brighter, more full. It was wonderful. Being with the two of you feels better than being alone. Ella's arms wrapping around Stace seemed to be translation enough for Iing. He started to lean out of the way to give the pair space, but she wasn't having it. She shot out an arm and grabbed Iing by his hair, the only thing she could reach as he moved. He made a sort of cute yelp, but got the message. He said the two of us. Iing grinned and joined in hugging the human, who was blushing bright red. He seemed to have no idea what to do, arms pinned to his sides by the two Shilvati. It was clear Stace felt awkward, but he wasn't trying to push them away. Ask him what happened to his ear. What? The non sequitur threw Ella for a loop. It took her a moment to remember that Stace's right ear was mostly missing on the top. Is that really important right now? Do it, it will be funny. Ella let out a sigh. Iing wants to know what happened to your ear. Stace's somehow flushed even brighter, the one ear that Ella could see turning so red she thought she could feel the heat coming off of it. He let out a little cough, with a word stuck to the end. She could barely hear AITE. What was that? She had an inkling now, and Iing's grin confirmed it. They were teasing their human. Frostbite. That was a word they all knew, and Iing slapped to the back of Stace's head, followed by a heavily accented bad human in English, had the trio laughing. When they finally released Stace, his hands immediately went to his face, like he was trying to hide. He was still smiling, though. Finally, he spoke. So, how does this work? That made Ella and Iing pause. How does it work with humans? In my experience, a few years of happiness followed by accusations, hatred, someone burning your house down with you still in it, then hiding in Alaska for a decade. Ella's slack-jawed translation of Stace's matter-of-fact nonsense sounds was unnerving to Iing. Someone tried to kill Stace? Why would they do that? You have heard the rumor of humans being so horny that they'll fuck anybody regardless of gender? Ella asked. Of course, Iing was kind of hoping it was true, after all. It turns out same-sex relationships like that aren't considered normal by humans either. At least not by everybody. Stace doesn't want to go into details, but apparently things went bad after Daniel's death and that was the driving factor. So what are you going to tell him about the Shilvati way of doing things? The truth. Even if it does make him unhappy again? Iing nodded. He hasn't really asked any questions about the Imperium, the outside world, anything. It's weird. Ella made a few questioning noises at the human. He didn't see a point in asking questions because he expected to be dead. Oh. That was fair. Happiness and warmth filled Stace. It was an old sensation, like putting on a favorite coat that you found in the back of the closet, but his two companions seemed to accept his feelings. For the first time since Daniel's death, Stace felt like maybe he could learn to move on. Like he actually had a life instead of just going through the motions. He had worried that he would have to choose, would have to hurt one of his friends, but it seemed to somehow be a non-issue. Still, there was always work to do. He slowly managed to extricate himself from the purple arms entangling him. The pad Stace had been using for his language lesson had fallen between his legs and, after a couple tries, he managed to snag it in one hand. A quick scroll through the list helped him put his sentence together. We must be happy. Ella got us her first getting food. What he wanted to say was that they should celebrate her first successful hunt, but the vocabulary wasn't there yet. Scrolling to the last sheet, Stace added celebration and hunt to his list of words to get translated. Iing giggled at Stace's awkward phrasing, so Stace reached over and playfully poked the lilac alien in the side. See you do as good. That just made him laugh harder, but it was clear Iing wasn't actually making fun of him, just enjoying the absurdity of it. Stace could appreciate that sort of humor. Get me up and I will cook. That shut him up, and the two Shilvati looked at each other. Stace, I don't think that's a good idea, Ella said. You're still weak. Goddess above, you can barely even sit up. He didn't recognize all of the words, but the intention was clear. What was above him? Let me sit and I will tell you what to do. I am tired of the bed. Hopefully that would be acceptable. He might be spending some of that goodwill he just earned, but Stace couldn't improve if he was stuck in bed all the time. He needed to find a way to get mobile if he was going to be a help. Iing slipped out of the bed and, while Ella climbed over Stace, perhaps lingering over him a bit more than was strictly necessary, the other male dragged the chair over. He noticed idly that somebody had made some modifications to it while he was out. The other arm had been removed and, for some reason, there was a hole drilled in the seat, centered horizontally but near the front edge. Odd. When Ella grabbed Stace and started lifting, He let out an involuntary groan of pain. While the ache in his legs was a constant droning in the background, once he shifted it became much sharper and more urgent. The large woman started to sit him back down, but he shook his head and tried to wrap his arms around her neck. Being princess carried was a bit humiliating, but no teasing or giggling came from Iing, and soon he was sitting on the chair. Stace tried to adjust, but instead found himself sliding down. He didn't have the lower body strength to hold himself up, and as soon as his right leg touched the floor, a shooting pain made him cry out. Stace squeezed his eyes shut and waited to fall. Instead, two large, strong hands held his shoulders, stopping him from moving down any farther. Carefully, Elora slid him back up until Stace was vertical again. While she held him in place, Iing laid a blanket over Stace's lap, then placed a strange-looking piece of wood over it and pushed down. The device had once been the arms of the chair, turned so that they met in the middle with a center post. Iing drove the wooden posts into the corresponding holes on the seat with a slap, and Stace suddenly found himself in something reminiscent of a toddler's high chair. The arms prevented him from falling left or right, and the addition of a center post between his legs meant he couldn't slide down and off the seat. He probably wouldn't have fit in the thing, but he seemed so much smaller now. Elora released Stace's shoulders and he slid down slightly, but between his elbows on the arms and wood post somewhat uncomfortably pressing on his groin, he wasn't going anywhere. This is... shit, what's the word, bad feeling? Elora's look for concern was accompanied by a hand sliding between Stace's legs, feeling around the post for sharp edges. She was being surprisingly professional about it. No. Like. What's the word for humiliating? Oh, humiliating. Now she smiled and ran a hand through Stace's hair. Yeah, I could see that. But it was either this or sit in my lap. The hand slid down to brush Stace's cheek, her thumb lightly stroking through his beard. Of course, if you want to do that I certainly wouldn't object. The casual touch felt good, and Stace's head seemed to tilt towards the hand of its own volition. After a moment, though, he managed to come to his senses. Come on, Stace, get your shit together. Work to do. Get the hair, I will show you how to cook it. Elora was trying to focus on the news, to be happy. For the first time in her life, she had a boyfriend. A boyfriend who was a human. A damaged, sickly human. A human she had to share with Iing. Then again, if they were sharing Stace, did that mean she had two boyfriends? Did Iing count? She would have to discuss it with him. They were so worried about Stace that the two really hadn't taken the time to discuss their own odd relationship. Come on, Elora. Get it together. You're a Marine, not a gossipy teenager. In the meantime, Stace needed help. She motioned for him to lift his leg, then slid the chair along the floor until he was up against the table. Though she would never admit it, he did sort of look like an infant in the modified chair. That was what she and Iing had based the idea on, after all. Once she handed him the shoe hair, Stace had further problems. He simply didn't have the arm strength to dress the kill. He could move it passably with his left arm, but he couldn't get enough strength with his dominant right arm to actually accomplish anything. She hadn't known the damage he had taken was that bad, that he was that weak, and apparently neither did Stace. Her tough, suicidally brave human actually looked like he might cry. A solution came to her, and Elora stepped behind him, her chest pressing against the back of Stace's head as she wrapped her arms around him. She took his right hand and draped it over hers, then picked up the thin, razor-sharp knife Stace had been trying to use. She felt his hand tighten slightly, and when he tried to move his arm she followed the motion with her own arm, letting the pressure from Stace's hand be her guide. With deliberate slowness, he showed her how to properly skin the animal, a far simpler process than Iing had to use for the caribou. The end result looked slightly horrifying, but Ella was becoming used to it. They removed the organs and saved the heart, liver, and kidneys to eat, with the rest for fish bait. Stace inspected the liver and explained in English that you can often tell if the animal had parasites or was sick by the condition of the liver. This one looked healthy, which meant it was likely safe to eat. After that, the hair was broken into portions and ready to cook. Ella patiently waited while Stace stared at the meat, a thoughtful look on his face. Finally, he pointed in the direction of his storeroom and let out a long sigh. "You will have to hold me." Watching proud, strong Stace get carried around like a storybook prince should have been amusing, but it wasn't. Instead, Ian just felt sad. He was closer to the human than he had ever been, but their roles had been so completely reversed that he didn't know how to feel about it. That strength that had been such an instant attraction seemed to be gone, but Ian thought he could still see it inside Stace, buried deep. He would resurrect it and get his Stace back. Grabbing a bowl, Ian followed Ella into the freezing storeroom. Stace started directing, and Ian grabbed ingredients. The names were foreign, but he recognized some of them from the few recipes he had tried. Potatoes, onions, peppers, garlic, a few dried herbs that were hanging in bundles from the ceiling. There was also some kind of grain. Not much was left, but at Stace's urging he grabbed 3 big handfuls for the bowl. By the time they went back to the main room, Ian's arms were full and Stace looked positively exhausted. Ella started making her way back to the chair, but Ian decided to intervene. Put him back in bed. Stace's glare didn't hold any real heat in it, but when his mouth opened to protest, Ian held up a hand. "You look like crap, Stace. Pushing yourself past your limits is how you ended up like this in the first place." He idly wondered if he made the sentence too complicated for the human's limited shill vocabulary, but apparently he was able to suss out most of it by context, because Stace nodded and let Ella tuck him in. From the bed, Stace was able to dictate the rest of the cooking instructions and Ian got to work. Soon, Stace was asleep and the stew was bubbling away over the fire. "We need to do something about Stace." Ian felt a familiar little burst of panic at the words, but tried to stay calm. "What do you mean?" Ella frowned. "Not like that. We need to find something he can do. He was working on those fish traps, but I think he stopped because he doesn't have the hand strength. Plus I think he might have nerve damage in his right arm along with the detached muscle. I could feel it spasming when we were taking apart that hair. So I guess the question is, what can a one-armed, one-legged, essentially bedridden human do to help us survive?" Now Ian was scowling. This is exactly what he was afraid of, why he didn't tell us about the frostbite in the first place. He thinks he is a burden to us. Even when he tries to do something as simple as cook a meal, he can't manage it. You couldn't see the look on his face when I told you to put him to bed. Stace looked crushed. "We'll have to come up with something. He did this to himself for us, and I really wouldn't mind just pampering him for the rest of the winter, but I don't think he'd care for it." Even though he could admit to being happy at Ella's change of attitude towards the human, Ian had to agree. They had to find something for him to do. Some way for him to feel productive, like wasn't a burden. They had a human now, and they had to figure out how to keep him. End of chapter. If you enjoyed, like, subscribe, click the bell so you don't miss any episode and do all the other YouTube stuff, visit and support the author, and I'll see you next time. If you didn't enjoy, comment on what I can do better. And as usual, have a wonderful day.